Hey yo, and welcome to How Would You Build? A little series in which I take your favorite characters from fiction, fantasy, and all forms of media and attempt to build them in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. In this series, we'll be using all source books from Wizards of the Coast, except for the 2024 revision of the Player's Handbook. If you have any suggestions for characters, please drop them in the comments, join the Discord to post an official request. Additionally, the full character build, written down with backstory suggestions and spell combos, will be on my coffee. In this episode, we will be building the King of Curses, the 1,000-year-old imaginary demon from Jujutsu Kaisen, Ryomen Sukuna himself. This build will contain spoilers for all the moments Sukuna is mentioned and appears, so if you haven't watched the entire show of Jujutsu Kaisen, I thoroughly recommend you go through it if you have the emotional energy to give. If you don't care about spoilers, we will try our best to build this mighty character as close as possible to how they are portrayed in the show. This also does include their domain without using any homebrew. To build Ryomen Sukuna, we need to make a character who is extremely cunning and extremely speedy as well. They're both fast in body and mind and use their uncanny mastery of curse energy and curse techniques to be able to overcome death, incredibly powerful enemies and blessed beings, and also take a lot of punishment. They should also exude fear and command great respect from foes and friends alike. Let's begin with Sukuna's stats. For his ability scores, we are going to be using the standard array. Firstly, we'll put a 15 in intelligence. Sukuna can think on the fly and has extremely good intuitive and deductive thinking when it comes to the mechanics of cursed energy of his opponents, including under pressure. He has elaborated strategies to turn combat very quickly in his favor. 14 will be in dexterity. He also happens to be incredibly fast and agile, likely aided by his cursed energy, but also his skill. He also does excel in archery. Next up will be 13 in charisma. He is a very intimidating character who commands great respect from everyone, including his allies. If you want to play on this sort of intimidation, make sure that you ask your DM if you could involve intelligence in some way, shape, or form into your intimidation checks on top of your charisma, or maybe instead of it. Otherwise, a certain spell will cover for it. His constitution isn't as high at 12 because he repeatedly uses his manipulation and mastery over cursed energy to keep himself alive. Lastly, we will dump wisdom and strength. While he is strong and has launched Megumi across several buildings, I have opted to make his strength come from his cursed energy in this build. Wisdom, also being so low, does make sense. Sukuna has no aspirations, no drive, and no personal goals beyond being the strongest, fighting the strongest, and doing anything he pleases in the moment. He does not understand humanity and loathes it in his way, despite recognizing every human being as unique. Sukuna thinks in the present and the individual, but struggles to see a big picture for himself. For his race, we can completely go with Variant Human if we want to lean on his transformation later on during the build. I have decided to go with Variant Tiefling. This grants us a boost in dexterity and intelligence, along with Dark Vision for 60 feet, resistances to fire damage, and the Hellfire Legacy for Thaumaturgy, Burning Hands at level 3, and Darkness at level 5. Sukuna's childhood is shrouded in a lot of myth and mystery, but he is the disgraced one, and that means that he is incredibly powerful, and he eventually gained the title of Sukuna for his demonic disposition and his insane, bloody victories in his time. This will also allow us to make him resist fire. One of his curse techniques does involve the element, and later down the line, cold and poison, as he can melt cold by his sheer presence and has been called a lethal poison or the king of lethal poisons, depending on your interpretation. Additionally, it gives us some weak fire spells to really drive the divide between what he was born with and what Sukuna has managed to become through his wit and hard years of fighting. For Sukuna's background, we can totally grab the hermit background, or maybe another background that you would like, but for this time we will go with a custom background that we will name the Disgraced One. For this custom background, we will grab acrobatics and intimidation in terms of skills. These two are quite needed, simply because our appearance with our version of Sukuna will be terrifying for many, and our unnatural physiology, boosted by our large amounts of cursed energy, will allow for feats of speed and athleticism that many consider impossible. Additionally, we will grab the cook's utensils for our tools proficiencies. Sukuna has been said to be a cannibal, and his shrine has been interpreted as a kitchen as well. For languages, we will get also the celestial language. as this could be flavored with him knowing one of the languages to speak with specific kinds of curses. From the hermit background, we shall take the scroll containing a few notes on Jujutsu, a winter blanket to cover himself when not fighting, common clothes to provide reliable garments that are not too bothersome in combat, and we will replace the herbalism kit for the cook's utensils. And we'll lastly obtain 5 gold from the equipment. For the feature, we will obtain the hermit feature discovery. Sukuna has discovered a great secret of cursed energy and Jujutsu as a whole, and has a deeper understanding as a result. Maybe it's from realizing the limits of his fellow sorcerers and adapting, or maybe it's realizing the power behind binding vows, which he implements ruthlessly all across the show. Regardless of whether your opponents know or do not know what your version of Sukuna's secret is, what always matters is to respond to a challenge in kind, for the greatest respect Sukuna gives to his strong opponents is nothing less than his full might. And now we begin with the level breakdown. At first level, we will start with Warlock. This will grant us proficiency in light armor and simple weapons. Additionally, we gain proficiency in wisdom and charisma saving throws. For the skills, we will get Arcana and Investigation, as Sukuna has shown himself to be extremely knowledgeable on cursed techniques, cursed energy, and Jujutsu as a whole. He is also able to come up with plans and techniques to beat his opponents using his already existing cursed techniques to his advantage. For the equipment, we will start with a light crossbow and 20 bolts. You can flavor this as a bow that takes time to fire properly if your setting doesn't get crossbows. Otherwise, you could probably replace this with a short bow without much issue. Additionally, you will also get a component pouch. Sukuna doesn't ever use a staff or a wand. Next up, we have a Dungeoneer's pack to get our bearings while we understand our technique deeper and start to delve into magic. For this first level, we will also use leather armor for Sukuna's very early beginnings. Additionally, it's also time period appropriate, as he shows a clear knowledge of the needs of his time. After this, we will take a spear. This will be his ever-present Hiten. It won't have much screen time though. And finally, 2 daggers. These can be our kitchen knives, one for all-purpose cutting and the other one for specialty cutting. They will be used to explain his curse technique and to cook foes into our meals. For the first level Warlock feature, we get Pact Magic. Our singular spell slot comes back on a short rest. This will be used to cast specific low-level spells to keep us buffed and ready for a fight throughout the adventuring day. The subclass we will select is Celestial. Sukuna was blessed from the beginning of his life, except that this blessing was dark. Deities can be good or evil, but in Jujutsu Kaisen, they seem to be mostly neutral. This grants us 2 spells from the expanded spell list, which we will grab for our pact casting. The first one is Cure Wounds. Sukuna is a prodigy, so reverse cursed healing immediately at the start, despite it being a little weak, is very much on character. And while we could have obtained it from a level of Artificer, Sukuna doesn't tinker with cursed objects beyond his own fingers, so I feel it would not be appropriate for this spell. Second up, we get Guiding Bolt. This is our starting, stronger Divine Flame. It's easier to avoid because of how slow it is, but the damage is hefty. After all, we have yet to make Binding Vows to make it stronger. For bonus cantrips, we also obtain Light to provide us the ability to shine a little bit of light with our Divine Flame, and Sacred Flame. This will be our starting weaker Divine Flame. Additionally, first level Celestial Warlocks get Healing Light. We only have a couple of uses of this tiny little bit of healing, but this will help us stabilize some of our allies and 10 Shadows users you'd like to take over later. In terms of spell casting, we will add to the previously mentioned spells the 2 cantrips of Eldritch Blast and Prestidigitation. Eldritch Blast will serve as our dismantle for the beginning of the game, as we discover new ways to apply it and eventually turn it into Cleave. For level 2, we obtain our first level of Wizard. This will first give us our spellbook. In this build, we take a majority of levels in Wizard from now on, so we can copy spells, and thus, if you find the spells that you're supposed to learn next level, you can totally copy them instead and learn new spells. Additionally, if your DM allows it, you can have your spellbook be part of the tattoos you manifest using Mage Armor. If you're allowed to do this, then you can chant Open before casting a different school of spell for flavor. The first level feature that we get for being a wizard is Arcane Recovery. Sukuna has deep knowledge of Jujutsu and can recover cursed energy fast and manage it very efficiently. For now, we'll go fully into Wizard to gain a massive pool of cursed energy that replenishes rather fast. This ability allows us to recover half of our Wizard level rounded up's worth of spells once per long rest. In terms of Wizard spellcasting, we obtain 3 cantrips and 6 spells. For the cantrips, we obtain Firebolt, 2 to emulate our proper studied divine flame. Then we get Sword Burst, which is a short-range dismantle that is absolutely indiscriminate of your foes and friends. Make sure to ask your DM, have this work on objects as well. And lastly, for our cantrips, we have Minor Illusion. This allows us to create flames in our hands and manipulate them in an intimidating display while we taunt our foes. For first level spells, we take Absorb Elements and Shield to further boost Sukuna's defenses, since he can tank pretty much any kind of damage with his peerless handling of cursed energy. Mage Armor also serves a similar purpose. After all, Sukuna is mostly torso out. The sign that this spell is cast can be that you dramatically tear off your clothes and tattoos manifest all over your body. False Life represents the use of cursed energy to maintain his body in a more resilient state, and this also lets us get away with our lower constitution. Lastly, we have Long Strider that lets us reach closer and closer to being able to run 60 kilometers an hour, which is something that Sukuna did when he caught up to Yuji in the manga. And finally, and most importantly, Magic Missile is Sukuna's cleave, since it has pretty much never missed and always inflicts damage. The force damage can be flavored in the same way as Sword Burst is flavored, Spectral Slashes. As we get more levels, we can spam this even more, giving no quarter to the weak and no reprieve to the strong. In terms of buffing though, make sure that you rely on that Warlock spell slot that recovers on a short rest to cast Mage Armor, False Life, for now at least. Take as many short rests as you feel to keep yourself prepared in these early levels. For level 3, we obtain our Hellfire Tiefling feature that lets us cast Burning Hands as a second level spell. Sukuna is still learning to improve his Divine Flame and turn it into the mighty furnace we see during the Maharaga fight. In terms of fighting, talking about fighting, we will grab the War Magic subclass. Now, the choice between Bladesinger and War Magic was very difficult, but it mainly came down to the efficiency and handling of his resources. The fight between Gojo and Sukuna lasts about 3 minutes, if not more, so his management of his cursed energy has to be incredibly expert. War Magic involves protecting your investments into concentration and giving you benefits, sometimes small ones, to make tactical decisions about what to disable and when to go on the offensive. Sukuna does rely on using Shrine Divine Flame slot, and much less on physical combat. This can be achieved by using Magic Missile to solve most of your problems, as it cannot miss, just like Sukuna's Cleave and Dismantle. The World Cleave was dodged by Awakened Maki, but we do grab a spell later on to be able to reproduce this exact scenario. Ultimately, if you want to build a Bladesinger, you can totally do that, as the choice is just as good. For War Magic, we obtain 2 features. The first one is Tactical Wit. We add our intelligence modifier to our initiative. Sukuna is incredibly intelligent, and he manages to come up with very creative solutions on the fly. The second one is Arcane Deflection. This represents making an impromptu binding vow, allowing for a momentary burst of cursed energy when you are hit or when you fail a saving throw, only for a reduced output of cursed energy afterwards. Since our initiative is quite high already, chances are great that we already have our concentration spells down, so we'll most likely use magic missiles for our cleave or cantrips when we use this ability to save further uses of shield. Make sure to use this ability towards the end of attacks targeting you, as doing so will massively improve your efficiency when using cursed energy. For spells, at this level we obtain Cause Fear to make our foes and friends disoriented with the power that is presented before them. Make sure you don't underestimate the frightened condition, as it is truly debilitating. The next spell is Thunderwave. This spell is to throw enemies around with punches so hefty even raindrops get blown away. At level 4, we obtain our 3rd level of Wizard. This grants us cantrip formulas, which we can flavor as Sukuna repeatedly showing that he can copy simple Jujutsu moves. If he sees a technique or a specific use of cursed energy, he can usually figure it out over the course of a long rest in terms of D&D mechanics. For spells at this level, we get our 2nd level spell slots, and we will obtain Blur and Shadowblade. Blur will be incredibly important, as Sukuna avoids attacks in a flash during the show. Shadowblade will also be reflavored as enhancing his fists with cursed energy to land blows that rattle even the soul of cursed spirits. Undead in D&D, for example, can be damaged by psychic damage, so the flavor is great. At level 5, we are a 4th level wizard, and we obtain our final Hellfire Tiefling feature. We can now cast Darkness. This can be used to sink back into the shadows creeping around you for dramatic effect. After all, we are playing Sukuna. For our feats, we will obtain Resilient for Constitution saving throws. Sukuna rarely loses focus on his current technique, needing extreme damage to have even a chance for it to drop. This will also get us closer to boosting our tankiness a little. We obtain another slot of 2nd level at this next milestone of Wizard. For now, we will get Shocking Grasp. In terms of cantrips, this will be a weaker version of Black Flash, stopping our opponents from reacting with a well-placed blow followed by Black Sparks. At this level as well, Sukuna begins to manifest elements of his endlessly slashing domain with Cloud of Daggers. The area is small and the spell is difficult to use, but we will obtain stronger ways to emulate his domain and trap enemies in the cloud of daggers later on. Aganazar's Scorcher is also a version of Divine Flame, where he pulls back an arrow of flame and unleashes it at everything in a line. Functionally, Firebolt and this spell look the same, but act differently in terms of what kind of attacks the enemies are subjected to. Versatility is what allows Sukuna to have solutions for so many problematic opponents. At level 6, we obtain our 5th level of Wizard. At this point, we obtain 3rd level spell slots, and the choices will be obvious. We will get Counterspell to remove the weak Jujutsu trying to target us. You can even flavor those spells as going off, but simply getting deflected by your open palm. Additionally, we will also get Fireball. This is Sukuna's Divine Flame reaching a milestone of its power, but the time is soon approaching that we make a binding vow to get access to Furnace during our deadly domain. At level 7, we obtain our 6th level of Wizard, and this time we get another slot of 3rd level. Before that slot though, we obtain Power Surge, our next War Magic subclass feature. After foiling his foes' Jujutsu techniques and cursed energy, Sukuna can turn back the newly acquired grasp of their technique into more effective damage. Make sure that you use this damage as much as possible against strong opponents, or to finish off a weak opponent with a weak attack. This can be flavored as another binding vow to gain power when you break through an enemy's technique. For spells, this time around, we will obtain Glyph of Warding and Haste. Glyph of Warding allows us to get a good power spike. When prepared, we can use this to set up Haste, Shadow Blade, or Blur, depending on what kind of fight we expect. After all, the strongest deserve nothing but Sukuna's strongest power, and Glyph of Warding allows us to stack buffs while the glyph itself holds concentration. Haste also allows us to run at nearly 60 kilometers an hour. To do so, we cast Longstrider first, and we obtain a Scroll of Expeditious Retreat. Maybe we can even copy it into our spellbook. Storing Haste in a Glyph of Warding will then result in a total speed of 80 feet. Using this speed, we can move 80 feet, then use our action for 80 more, which is about 160 total, then our Haste action for 80 more, which is 240 feet total, and finally, Expeditious Retreat as a bonus action to dash for a total of 320 feet of movement over 6 seconds, which is about 58 kilometers an hour, allowing him to finally catch up to the speedy Yuji. If you want even more speed, the Blade Singer subclass and the Mobile Feat can take this beyond this current limit. At 8th level, we get our 7th level of Wizard, and this will unlock 4th level spells for us. The spells we will obtain is the spell Fly, as Sukuna has been seen kind of floating around mid-fight, propelling himself with enhanced speed and strength. And for 4th level, we will obtain Otiluk's Resilient Sphere. This allows us to finally obtain a miniature version of Sukuna's domain expansion. The steps to execute it essentially involve placing down a 3rd level Glyph of Warding containing Cloud of Daggers, with the trigger being that the spell is cast when the caster, that is us, is saying domain expansion while looking at a creature. You could, of course, make the trigger more centered on the creature, for example, the creature being targeted with Otiluk's Resilient Sphere, but before the save is made, Cloud of Daggers is cast. Afterwards, once your designated enemy is within 60 feet of the Glyph of Warding, and within 30 feet of you, you can cast Otiluk's Resilient Sphere, with the vocal component being domain expansion, Malevolent Shrine. Ask your party to hold down the sphere, preventing the enemy from moving and breaking the Cloud of Daggers against the Resilient Sphere, and hold concentration until you turn the enemy to jam. For level 9, we are now an 8th level wizard. This grants us the feat Infernal Constitution, because we're a tiefling. Sukuna is known as the King of Curses, and also said to be either a lethal poison or King of Lethal Poisons. It is only fair to assume that someone who's cursed, energy renders air harder to breathe by their sheer presence, and becomes a lethal poison, would be resistant to it. Additionally, it also bestows resistance to cold damage, as Sukuna almost melts ice by his presence alone. At this point, we obtain another 4th level spell slot, and we will get Magic Circle and Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum. These two spells continue Sukuna's experimentation with domains and barriers. These will become ways to counter teleporting enemies within our domain later on. Additionally, our initial domain expansion has just become more powerful. Simply put, we can now cast a 4th level Glyph of Warding with a 4th level Cloud of Daggers. Then we short rest and regain one 4th level slot with Arcane Recovery for Otiluk's Resilient Sphere. At level 10, we obtain our 9th level of Wizard. At this point, we gain our 5th level spell slot, and this will grant us 2 following spells, Wall of Force and Immolation. Our domain has just upgraded and allows us to also include Furnace inside of it. Wall of Force will replace Otiluk's Resilient Sphere if you need more firepower to hit the enemy with. Here is the order to cast this newer and improved, powerful version of Sukuna's domain expansion. Initially, you should place down a 3rd level Glyph of Warding containing Fireball within 50 feet of the next glyph. The trigger is to cast the spell centered on the glyph when the caster chants Furnace. Afterwards, you place down a 4th level Glyph of Warding containing Cloud of Daggers. This spell will be cast when the caster is looking at a creature and says domain expansion. And finally, force your enemy into attacking you by holding an action to cast your Wall of Force while you taunt them. Once your designated enemy walks on top of the Glyph of Warding Fireball, cast a 5 foot by 5 foot wall of force, with the vocal component being domain expansion, Malevolent Shrine. When your enemy is trapped and being sliced, walk up to the sphere, open your arms wide, and begin chanting Furnace as you watch your enemy explode or melt on the spot. Additionally, if your enemy is able to teleport, make sure that you also put a glyph of warding with Magic Circle or Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum to have it trigger at the same time as Cloud of Daggers with the same trigger word. At level 11, we become a 10th level wizard. This will give us the subclass featured Durable Magic. Whenever we are concentrating on a spell, our concentration and AC are now higher. Later on, this means that we can even avoid whole meteors from a certain disaster curse a lot easier. Not to mention, most of our important options are also concentration. This level also grants us an additional slot in 5th level. We will learn Control Flames, Ryomen Secret Chest, and Contact Other Plane. Control Flames allows Sukuna an additional mastery over fire. Additionally, he also has millennia of experience and knowledge, but since that is very difficult to ask for in Dungeons & Dragons, ask extraplanar entities through your inner focus on your own cursed energy to ritually obtain information from whatever forces you decide are worthy of your time. This becomes your knowledge, expanding the more you ask to learn. Finally, we obtain Ryomen's Secret Chest, the component being flavored as more tattoos imbued with expensive inks and gems. This allows us to store scrolls with more spells that we may need in a pinch, maybe even some curse tools. At level 12, we become an 11th level wizard. This grants us our singular 6th level spell slot, and we can now have Globe of Invulnerability and Fizzban's Platinum Shield. With Globe of Invulnerability, we obtain Hollow Wicker Basket. Enemies can still come within our simple domain, but it protects us from the effects of our foes' attempts at a domain. While Fizzban's Platinum Shield allows us to get evasion, +2 to AC, +2 to dexterity saving throws, and resistance to either acid or lightning, since we already resist the other elements. This spell is made to fight curses and curse users like Chogo. The bonuses are perfect for those enemies, and allows us to be even more resilient than we already are. Our true domain, though, is slowly taking shape, so make sure you keep up casting Cloud of Daggers to ensure a speedier and speedier demise for your foes. At level 13, we become a 12th level wizard and we obtain the Tough Feat. This will boost Sukuna's tankiness even more, in addition to his curse energy and his improved resilience with the use of it. Our slots at this level remain unchanged, but we obtain the spell Disintegrate and Magic Jar. Disintegrate is improvised by Sukuna when he meets with the Honored One himself, Gojo. When he does, he invents a new technique called World Cutting Slash. Disintegrate functions similarly. It requires a dexterity saving throw or you take a ton of force damage, and if the opponent is killed, we can flavor that instead of turning to dust, they are bisected with no chance of revival, but they could be put back together and host a new soul. Any DM shouldn't have a problem with this flavor, as it effectively throws them a bone to bring back a character with a vengeance, but hosted by someone else. Additionally, it allows for characters like Maki with their extreme speed and dexterity to dodge World Cutting Slash. Magic Jar is also a setup Sukuna is trying to replicate from Kenjaku, namely possessing bodies. For now, this set of spells remains a theory, nothing more, but temporary body hopping is available. For level 14, we obtain our 13th level of Wizard. At this point, we have one additional slot of 7th level, and for this 7th level, we obtain the spell Symbol and Force Cage. Sukuna's domain has just massively improved, so we can forget momentarily about using Cloud of Daggers, and instead we can use Symbol for big, mean enemies or gigantic groups of them. To successfully replicate Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine and Furnace, you will first need to place down a 5th level Glyph of Warding containing Fireball within 60 feet of the symbol. The trigger will be to cast the spell centered on the glyph when the caster chants Furnace. Next up, you place down your symbol wherever you feel, and the trigger will be to create the death effect when the caster looks at a creature and chants Malevolent Shrine. Next up, you will goad your enemy into attacking you by holding an action to cast your Wall of Force. Once your designated enemy walks anywhere near the 60 feet of your symbol, cast your Wall of Force by chanting Domain Expansion. Continue chanting and say as a free action, Malevolent Shrine, and walk up to the sphere where your opponent is slowly perishing over the course of 10 minutes, and begin chanting Furnace as you watch them melt and explode on the spot. Additionally, if you have 1 day to prepare symbol, you can cast Force Gauge instead of Wall of Force to make teleporting even more difficult. You could, of course, use Magic Circle or Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum if you feel like it. At level 15, we become a 14th level wizard, and at this point we get our final subclass feature, Deflecting Shroud. Whenever we make a binding vow, we essentially barrage our enemy with a small amount of cleaves just as an added insult to them. This ability does not require a saving throw or even an attack. For this level, our slots remain entirely unchanged, but we will obtain the spells Steelwind Strike and Delayed Blast Fireball. Steel Wind Strike involves Sukuna immediately dispatching weak foes entirely unworthy of his time, and nearly instantaneous dismantle through them. If you manage to prepare Symbol one day in advance, you can cast Mordekainen's Private Sanctum, as well as put your Wall of Force into another glyph as well. Your trigger for the Wall of Force and the Private Sanctum is the word Domain when you speak it, and Malevolent Shrine so that the symbol activates. Before saying any of these, chant Open as a verbal component for Delayed Blast Fireball. Your foe will slowly be torn to shreds by the symbol without true means of an escape, and then, right before the end of your combo, unleash a 22d6 Delayed Blast Fireball to truly cook your opponent. At level 16, we obtain our 15th level of Wizard, which gives us a singular slot of 8th level, and this allows us to prepare Sunburst and Mind Blank. Sunburst is the ultimate form of our Furnace, and now we can also cast Globe of Invulnerability to level 8, granting us immunity to the zone of the symbol spell, and so by setting up Symbol at the edge of our Globe of Invulnerability, which we cast by saying Domain Expansion, and having the symbol trigger when we say Malevolent Shrine, we have our open domain. We can even open our Furnace by casting a 6th level Fireball. Just make sure you cast Resilient Sphere whenever it is you want to exit your Globe of Invulnerability. If our foes want to come into our little bucket of safety, we can also trigger Mordekainen's Private Sanctum, along with a Wall of Force around the edge of our Globe of Invulnerability, both being stored in Glyphs of Wording. An additional means of escape could also be a teleportation spell like Misty Step, or maybe even Far Step or Thunder Step, particularly. If you wish to have these spells, you can swap out any of the other damaging spells that we don't use for the domain, or you could also copy them into your spellbook as a new tattoo. Essentially, we have endless control of our domain now, and how it will be presented, for either many enemies, a single enemy, or for unbridled destruction within 60 feet of us. At level 17, we become a 16th level wizard. At this point, we will use our ability score increase to boost our intelligence by 2, making our spells harder to resist. Our spell slots remain unchanged, but we will obtain the spells Illusory Dragon and Clone. Clone allows Sukuna to begin the process of turning his fingers into cursed objects to be incarnated at a later date. Discuss with your DM how it could possibly affect you and cool ways to flavor the new bodies that eat your fingers. Illusory Dragon is an easy way to get Sukuna's domain. Simply change the dragon to an Eldritch Shrine and keep it stationary right behind you, with its effects being slightly in front of you. At level 18, we obtain our 17th level of Wizard. This grants us a 9th level spell slot and the 2 spells Wish and True Polymorph. Wish allows Sukuna to use similar techniques and cursed energy to Kenjaku, to cast Death Ward and feed his cursed finger to the 10 Shadows user to overtake his body. It could also be used to massively heal himself of any injuries in a desperate time. True Polymorph is left to you and your DM's discretion though. You could elaborate in your form appropriate for your current level and change into it permanently, obtaining your 4-armed, 4-eyed form. Additionally, our Furnace, Delayed Blast Fireball, can be cast as a 9th level spell to allow for even more damage during our domain expansion. At level 19, we obtain our final wizard feature, Spell Mastery. Sukuna is incredibly difficult to hit, so we will choose Shield for our first level at-will spell and Blur for our second level at-will. Other options work perfectly, so pick whatever you feel will be useful for you. In terms of spell slots, we obtain another slot of 5th level, and we get the spells Dispel Magic and Imprisonment. Spell Magic allows us to remove any petty Jujutsu barrier and technique in our way, and Imprisonment is another more acceptable way of achieving functional immortality, being released from our eternal, never-aging containment with a condition of our choosing, like another limitless user with 6 eyes achieves awakening. For our final level, we obtain our 19th level of Wizard. This grants us another +2 in intelligence from our ASI, which caps our intelligence at 20, and another slot of 6th level. With this, we obtain the spell's Contingency for stacking as many buffs as we deem necessary, and Blade of Disaster to effectively create a better cleave that we can control, except it can be repeatedly used when we create our closed domain around our target. Now for pros and cons. Ryomen Sukuna with this build is a highly versatile character when you are prepared properly. The domain expansions that we have created with their various appearances and various conditions, when they are set up right, they tend to be a near automatic win. If the opponent cannot cast spells, they will have a hard time escaping it. This build also has amazing resource management, namely thanks to the War Magic class and that dip into Warlock in the early levels, and thanks to that as well, it also has incredible tanking depending on what kind of enemy you might be facing in the moment, with your resistances, your great saving throws, and all your different spells that you can either use to counter enemy magic or to resist it even more. For cons, this build is reliant on a lot of patience and explaining some things to your party and your DM. Some of these domain expansions might trivialize encounters, which might end up stealing the spotlight, so make sure that that's okay with your party, and maybe work a little system in which you only use your domain expansion after you tackle a boss for the second or maybe third time. Additionally, while this build is very versatile, it has nearly no utility, at least in the earlier levels. Sukuna is built for combat and is built for fighting, and this build reflects it. And lastly, the domain expansion is quite complicated and costly to set up, but if set up correctly, it will do just as in the show, usually an automatic win. And that's it for this episode of How Would You Build, focused on the disgraced one, Ryomen Sukuna from Jujutsu Kaisen. I hope that with this build you've all enjoyed and that you agree with me on some of these build decisions. Additionally, I also really hope that you appreciate and agree with my version of the domain expansions. It was very difficult to figure it out using only Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition source books from Wizards of the Coast and no homebrew, but I feel I have come as close as we can to getting a domain expansion with the current set of rules. If you prefer to build Sukuna a different way, or if you feel like he is more of a charismatic character than an intelligent character, then feel free to change the build as you see fit. Make sure as well to drop your suggestions down in the comments, maybe do a little subscribe if you want to see more of these interesting builds where I figure out how to make overpowered characters into player characters in D&D. Because subscribing is probably the best way to tell me that you want to see more of these lore-accurate builds. In any case, I will be seeing you all very soon, be it here, on the Twitch, or maybe even on the Discord, for more content related to D&D or other comfy little shenanigans. Bye-bye!